And welcome to the delicious recipe here on UPRN. We're doing this on February 1st, but it'll air on February 2nd, just for the time being. This one is called Ewe Stew, the Imbolc Style. And I have with me Varla Ventura joining me once again for these great 2 month, quarter months, whatever they come out there, these festivals that happen on there. Welcome, Varla.
Why, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So going into this part, I should also say there too is that we're also on Roku there now, and that you can watch over there too as well. We're also on the other YouTube channels, UFO Paranormal Radio done twice, and UFO Gods and Extraterrestrials, and we're on SoundCloud, Spreaker, iHeart, all the places where podcasts can be seen. And always a shout out to hey you Kitty Pot and Blaze there for my quiet producers that help with the show. So on with the show. So we're looking at this quarter point, I guess, in between the solstice and equinoxes. Imbolc. Do you want to tell the people there, Varla, what is Imbolc, if I'm saying that correctly?
Yeah, I mean that's how I say it. We could both be saying it wrong, but Imbolc is it is exactly that. It's the halfway point between Yule or the winter solstice and the spring, Austera, the kind of the beginning of spring. And it's essentially a time to recognize the bounty of the earth at a time when there is no actual bounty. So it's a way of kind of bringing light into an otherwise dark time. But unlike the solstice, where you're kind of just beginning to enter into the darkness of winter, here we kind of, at this point, can kind of see the light. And so ritualistically, this is represented by bonfires and candles. Bridget is often portrayed with a crown of candles. And it's a time, and then of course, so symbolically you're bringing the light in, ritualistically you're bringing actual fire into your hearth, your home, your lands, whatever you have. And like on a more metaphysical level, what you're actually doing is sort of saying, hey, Mother Goddess, we know you're amazing, we know you're coming, we're holding out for you. We know this winter will end, and we're asking for an abundant spring.
Right. Yes. And this part, the Mother Goddess Bridget, right? This is the one that's sort of been there. And I sort of looked at this there. I guess she was like the daughter of the Dagda. I guess he was sort of the main guy of magic and mysticism or whatever, I guess, in that part
in
of that
Ireland.
of that Celtic lore. But she plays a pretty big role. And we were talking earlier there how we've said this many times about how pagan traditions seem to get hijacked as well. And
absolutely.
And there's a bit about that, but she pulled it, like the Mother Goddess Bridget, I guess that if you'd say there is that she was sort of she brings this whole rejuvenation, I guess, as part of her thing, but she holds many other titles, I guess, as well too.
Oh, she's one of the patron saints. I mean, she's now a saint, Saint Bridget, but she is a goddess of healing and medicine. She can be called upon for rituals involving medicine and healing, as well as kind of guardianship during birth and even in the passage into death. But also she is kind of a representation of all of the goddesses. She has kind of that whole mother, maiden, and crone in her, just as Mother Nature does. But Bridget in particular is sacred to this time because she is able to kind of carry people through difficult times. I think that's probably why she has become associated with medicine and healing, because you're seeking out healing because you're hurt. And so those are often the most difficult times for us physically and psychologically, as this part of winter is often the most difficult time. It's not, there's not a big holiday around the corner.
Right.
There's kind of gotten through sort of the like beginning of the year slump and getting back to things. And then there's this kind of stretch here over the next month and a half, depending on where you live exactly. Of course, your winter may be shorter or longer, but there's this kind of stretch where it feels a little bit like limbo. And so it's important to have this, and certainly was important during a time when people really relied on the harvest of the land and what the earth gave them, to be able to mark that.
Right. Yeah, and also too is that she's one of the few goddesses that's referenced as a 3-part person. She holds inspiration with the hammer for blacksmiths, the healing cup there for that for the birth, and I guess the part with the ewe, that's which is a female sheep, is the birthing of sheep at that time. And something that I had read there is that which was sort of important there too, is that with the birth of a sheep, that gave you milk, and that was as your food stores were running down, you had this nutritious milk that you'd be able to help to carry you through, and the new outcropping of plants that sort of come up at this time, as well as the snow is starting to melt a little bit, and the first little bits of greenery come up.
Right. Yeah, and that's a really good point about the that as we know that spring represents birth and new beginnings, but it's also the act of being like livestock being pregnant and giving birth also provides humans with milk. The act of gestation will create that in the cow or the sheep or the the goat. And so that also does carry you through just in a very like basic human need to have that kind of sustenance. And so it makes sense that that's an animal that's associated with her and sacred to her as well. Not to mention, you got wool, which keeps you warm and gets you through the cold nights.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Well, that I guess that's the sort of the amazing part about these old pagan traditions, or the way that they sort of looked at things before religion sort of got in and sort of hijacked a lot of this stuff to take over for themselves to bring into Catholicism, is that you're looking at areas in the world that very cold and very hard winters and very hard growing seasons and stuff like that. And they were very, I guess, even with the way that the pagan now calendar is sort of set up, at all these sort of every 2-month points or whatever, or not 2 months or whatever, how it separates out there the seasons, and with the in-betweens with the solstices and stuff like that, that these were all important times to make sure that you harvest there, you got food going, then everything like this, everything was sort of done, sort of time scheduled out, I guess, throughout the year. And these in-between points that I just say is that these were all called, what I guess the Celtics called these fire festivals or something like that. Whereas like the solstice and equinoxes were sort of different ones, but like with Samhain and stuff like that, big fires and stuff like that. Is there any reason that these ones were sort of associated with the fire, with these festivals?
I think if you look at like the times in particular, I mean, there's something very just we can all relate to the that kind of bonding ritual of standing around a fire, whether that's when you're camping or on your own property, or you're doing actually like a big ritual bonfire. The other thing about bonfires is that apart from getting the wood, they're essentially free. And so everyone can bring a few branches here, a few branches there, some dried husks or whatever it is that you have available to light on that fire. And so it becomes a very communal experience. And so I think there's sort of an offering element involved in that. with a lot of the big bonfire related festivals, you also had, the idea that you could take some of that, a coal from that fire and bring it back to your own house to kind of, to your own hearth to sort of set the tone. And we don't really think of this as the new year in the Celtic wheel of the year, but in other cultures it is a new year. In our westernized North American culture, it's the beginning of the new year or very close to it. It's the Lunar New Year, so it's the beginning of a new season, a new year. And so it just has this very kind of cleansing property to it. So I think there's some practicalities of it just being essentially, a free resource that everyone could gather around, but also that it's very, it's very cleansing and symbolic. In addition, there's probably some agricultural value to that. If you look at like Samhain, so you're talking about like, Halloween time, and you're basically gonna just burn down whatever's left and harvest what's in the fields, burn down whatever is left, and kind of just set clean the fields. And then your harvest the next year is going to be easier. Plus we know that when we have ash, we have potash, which is a really valuable nutrient for plants. Plants have to have that. And you've got to have nitrogen, potash, and what's the third one? Potassium. Potassium.
Potash,
yeah. So there's those practicalities as well, especially if you're thinking of like, an agricultural society kind of built around having these things take place like out in the field. So there's some value also in how it kind of scorches the earth.
Right. Yeah, that's good. I didn't even think about that. That makes a lot of sense there. Yeah, preparing for the new season into going into things. Yeah, it's like right now here where I am up in Thunder Bay, well, for February 1st, I still have about 4 feet of snow.
Same. Yeah. Maybe I've got 2 only. So yeah, a little further south down here in the tropics. Tropics of Minnesota.
Yeah. But also there was you showed me something there just beforehand. Is I guess there's some sort of figurines, and I guess these would have been made with the old stalks of the harvest that was done from the fall time.
The corn husk, the little corn husk dolly. So these are a very common toy that were made around in our considered sacred to Bridget. And then we had also mentioned there's kind of a cross. It's called Bridget's cross. I don't have one here with me, but that's another kind of, put this little guy over here. Trying to find a spot for it. My son made me that. But it's because Bridget is the mother. The act of making a dolly for children to carry as if it's their own baby, that also has a lot of tie-in with the idea of celebrating birth and the rebirth, rather than looking at it as something scary, something you're not allowed to know about, something that is a negative or in some way a burden, looking at it as a real gift and that renewal of life being part of it. So the act of making little effigies basically of Bridget and then carrying them around as little, versions, you can imagine all these little kids running around pretending that those are their babies. So
right. I guess anything that sort of sort of just reminds you about who you are and what you're doing there for anyways, for just I guess, sort of looking at for some sort of semblance of some sort of thing that you're hope for it's going to be a good year, that you're sort of putting some
Sure.
little bit of that sort of feeling in towards that, I guess that would.
Yes, that idea of hope and renewal, and something like, what is more hopeful than, a tiny baby or a little baby sheep, or, a little baby goat or a tiny little chick that you might hold in your hand. And so the idea of like celebrating that, but it also, effective rituals tie in all ages. So while there may have been aspects of every gathering that were, different people's responsibilities, children are a part of that, ritual. And so having a way for like that, I always find that really interesting too, especially, as a mom, just trying to like think, oh, what did kids back then do? How did they participate in this ritual? Like, I know we talked about, back in October when we were talking about Halloween, about the sort of tradition of trick or treating and how that sort of evolved, of children going around and gathering something to contribute to the big communal bonfire, whether it was food or wood to actually put in the fire. And that eventually, or a monetary contribution so people could buy enough for everyone to share. And that eventually kind of evolves into, the more modern idea of going, door to door and getting Snickers.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, I guess in a way, well, you got to figure, well, the population back then is nowhere close to where 7.6 billion people here anyways,
Right.
but
Yeah.
a lot less, considerably a lot less. But I guess in a way you sort of look at this is that it sort of allowed an equalization for people that might not have been doing as well as somebody else down the road. So you sort of got to even out a little bit of your resources if you had a little bit more, like especially like during Halloween time. That part of Samhain was that you went out and you got a little bit of this and you gave what you could and you got back a little bit more. And I guess it sort of helped out to allow you to go forward.
Yeah, the original socialists, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
There's
exactly.
free healthcare and but yeah, absolutely. And there is that kind of like the group mindset that it's important to that everybody puts in whatever their share is. So you might that didn't mean that people didn't have their own property or their own lands or and there weren't leaders, right? But it meant that everyone collectively recognized the importance of this time, and that whether that was Imbolc and the beginning of the spring, the turning towards spring, or if whatever season it is, that it's kind of an all hands on deck mentality. And we've spoken before about how there are, it's no surprise that there are very specific Catholic holidays that coincide, in some cases, almost directly with some of these original pagan traditions. But it was a really smart move on the, good PR move from the Catholic Church as they
Right.
were converting the heathens, the pagans,
Yep.
to continue to create a ritual at a time that was, I mean, you can't just take away all the fun at once, right?
Right.
You have to do it gradually.
Well, yeah. Well, that's the whole thing about changing history, and people like Joseph Goebbels and Edward Bernays talked about this: is that you repeat something, or you long enough, people believe it to be true, right? So you even see that even happening today, changing storylines there and changing the narratives in there, changing characters out, and so the new generation that sort of see this now, they don't remember how the story was 40 years ago because
Right.
all they've seen is the new version. And that's, if you look at that, there is how the Catholic or Catholicism came in and sort of hijacked this. This is actually the most blatant one, period, out of all of the stuff, because Bridget was I looked at my research there. There was no Saint Bridget anyway, so they sort of created her and took everything that she was from her goddess status.
Called her a saint. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And then they took the whole thing. Well, I guess even the story there that I was looking in with Bridget, there is there was other parts to her besides having being a a 3-part goddess that had like the healing cup and the smithy's hammer for inspiration, and that she also traveled around with that. I don't know if maybe you know this, or maybe you can say more. She traveled around with two powerful oxen. I can't remember what their names is. A famous boar from a Thurian legend, and a legendary ram, the king of sheep.
Mm. She is frequently depicted as having, basically these like this small herd, like this livestock. And there's actually quite a few Celtic goddesses who are sacredly associated with cows, in particular, oxen. Um, and and I think that also owes to her association with, I mean, oxen have been used, or cows have been used in livestock in general, to create the right kind of environment to plant things for,
Right.
as long as we've had any kind of domesticated livestock. And cross culturally, in many cultures, they turn the soil naturally, they fertilize the soil naturally, they eat the stuff that you don't want there
Right.
anymore. And then, of course, eventually we were able to hook up, little harrows to them and
Yeah.
plow things. Which remind me, I said the word harrow because I have a kind of a funny, cool thing about that word
Okay.
that ties in with the word hearse. But
Okay, because I was going to say yoke, but yeah, hero. Okay, that's,
but a yoke, and then basically just the idea that that those were, those were already sacred animals and very strong, kind
yeah.
of shows just her importance in the role. And I think that we probably think today more about kind of the big holidays. So
Right.
we think about the Yule solstice connection, or the Samhain Halloween connection. But these, what might be considered, like these lesser holidays, they're midway points.
Yeah.
While they weren't necessarily, they didn't represent the same things, they were
hmm
equally important in kind of progressing through the Celtic wheel of the year, for
Right.
sure.
Yeah, see, like with the big four, right? The equinoxes and the solstices. Those ones, I guess you would say maybe is that they were more uh, related to the heavens, what was going on in there, and then these ones were sort of maybe a reminder in the middle that you're in
It,
between. Maybe
and morale boosters also,
right,
like, hey, guess what, because it's hard to know, it's kind of like if you're in the middle of doing something really difficult
right,
and you don't have any access to the time. At a certain point, like, you need to know, how much longer am I going to do this?
right,
Because honestly, if you're sitting there doing sit-ups or something and someone comes along and says just two more, suddenly you feel fine. But if
right.
you're just like, I've been doing this a while and it hurts, so I need some kind of check in there. So they were check-in points, um, you know, again, spiritually and psychologically, as well as the absolute uh, practical connection to the earth that was required to
Right.
have to make these offerings and to ensure some kind of harmony.
hmm Yeah. Well, even going into this part with part with the fire, because this is a part that was sort of taken by the Catholic Church, was Candlemas, and they
Mm-hmm.
sort of really did this part with this candle, and the candle was like a blessing of a candle, and this ties into the part where it moved into being a hedgehog into a groundhog from the Germans over to here, and
Yeah.
Puxatawny Phil,
Yeah.
right? Because that was the whole part about this February 1st time, was this was for that point before the spring, to find out if you're going to have 6 more weeks of disastrous winter still ahead, or if it's
Right.
going to be a nice, depending on
Yeah.
how the shadow was. If it was sunny, that's the shadow was there, 6 more weeks of winter, and then if it was whatever cloudy and there was no sort of real reflection down, that's how they sort of went with the candle. And then this gets even crazier. Like the way that they sort of really pulled all this stuff there and really religiousized it all.
Yeah.
It's sort of
Yeah.
amazing because they pushed this whole thing into the 40 days after the birth of Jesus Christ, which was supposed to be December 25th, which is very debatable whether that was there because they were paying taxes, and taxes you don't pay at the end of Christmas. You pay that sort of in the fall time. But at
Mm-hmm.
that time there, because when they were traveling by donkey across there was no snow at the inn they were going to. There was just there's a lot of different debate about.
There's a few plot holes, we'll
Yeah,
admit.
something a little bit different with days, but the way that they pulled it is that okay, so you have the birth there, and then 40 days later, this is how they sort of did this with this presentation of the temple and presentation of the child. It goes back to Moses with the firstborn son being presented there to the Lord, and then the woman, after she gave birth, she had to wait 40 days for a cleansing. That's why she went in for a prayer, was given this candle, which was a a candle that would show about cleansing for the year, and this holy candle was good. So in any times of darkness, you had this sort of this light source that was there. The story gets really, really unbelievable. How they really tried to really push it and tie it into them so tightly.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Yes. And in different parts of the world, kind of taking that same idea and just that is how we end up with all of these different stories around the same holiday, because you're gonna say one thing over here and something else over here to kind of like pull it in, and then of course people are just gonna adopt their own and adapt their own things, or see their own parallels. And like of course observing animals is an excellent way to figure out how hard the winter is going to be and how soft the spring will be, right? Like I always watch the squirrels with great trepidation here. Oh no, they're really active. It's going to be a long, cold winter,
Oh,
and so it has been.
no, don't talk to me
So,
about squirrels. They call those rats with a furry tail. Yeah, chipmunks I can handle. Squirrels, no. The amount of damage they do out at camp with wires and
oh, they are crafty. They are crafty.
yes, they are. But
Yeah.
another part there out of here too is, well, with the healing stuff. I just saw this even earlier today. There, they have this thing in, I guess, in Ireland. They call it the Irish holy wells, and with healing, and they actually do trips to these things, and they put these little effigies and the Bridget's cross and that little man guy there out of straw. Anything about that?
So I've been to quite a few of those wells. They're really they're fairy wells.
Okay.
And they have been I mean there's sacred to different things. Some people might call them the fairy well, or they might call it Bridget's well. There was one that I visited that was used during Celtic times to do rituals and to kind of cleanse in preparation for just kind of connecting with the fairy kingdom, that then became now it's sacred to Saint Patrick. So
okay.
and there's even there's a little shrine there with various offerings and things like that. And so one thing in particular in Ireland, my observation is that the Irish culture is a strong culture, and it's very resilient and adaptable. And so as they're not throwing lack of a better term, baby out with the bathwater. There are many people that still recognize the importance of old ways and the new ways of the church, or were raised in the church but aren't discounting the rich tradition and lore from that area. So but yeah, there are Bridget wells. I actually have some water from one.
Oh, really?
And yeah, I have some water from one from a well in Ireland, one from a well that my mom visited in Scotland, and I cannot remember who that well was dedicated to. And then I have some water from something very similar from in Venice, Italy, there is a little place that has aqua de incurable, and it's basically the water of the incurables, and it's supposed to be this healing miracle water that if you drink it, it heals. I mean, people would bring, their children from all around, and ill relatives from all around the country to this particular aquifer, this mineral spring in the middle of the city. And I've always, and I'm not going in there taking water. Like, these are places where you're allowed to take a little water. And, I just have like a tiny little bottle that, but like
brought to you by Dasani.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. But the Bridget, I actually used that when to bless my son when he was born. I used some of that water. So. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's another part. There's two parts to this. I got to ask you about this. So the part about the water here, anyways, that's a really interesting healing waters. Like there was the Fountain of Youth. There was the parts with that. I think was it Ponce de Leon or Cortez or something.
I think it was Ponce de Leon was looking for the Fountain of Youth, and it's said to have found it in Florida.
Oh, okay. Yeah. But since we're also there too, as we talked many times there about these magical little creatures and that, is there anything about them that is around this time here, around this? I know we have later on, we have Valentine's Day that ended up becoming Saint Valentine's Day. That was also then it became commercialized to these little card. The card company took that all over.
Yeah, all you got to do is throw a saint in front of it, and it becomes Catholic. So you're good to go.
Yeah.
Because this is a great time for recognizing and kind of being respectful and perhaps making offerings to some of the fairy kingdom, because that kind of is so tied in with the earth and what's kind of living just beneath the earth and these fairy mounds and these dwellings. And if you think of it, rather than it being like different, like a different classification, it's kind of like, the fairy kingdom is that other world, and there are a lot of things that can go to and fro, whether it's a strange creature. Goddesses and gods usually have the ability to pass easily between kind of the world of mortals and the world of fairies. But there's just, it's just a great time to just be on the lookout for them as well, because as things are springing forth from the earth, so too they may be kind of flitting about. And there are plenty of warnings to not be out late at night. Now, in practicality, you could be caught unaware with, temperatures dropping, and it wouldn't be safe. But also there's, plenty of darkness still. And getting caught away from your home where you're supposed to be contributing to the the communal good, whether that's of your family or the village or wherever you're living. If you're out gallivanting about in the fields at midnight doing who knows what with who knows who, then that's going to be considered bad luck. It definitely, that is another thing about it, though. It is a time to, just as with some of the other holidays, it's also a great time because the weather is still cold, but it's not quite as severe. It is a good time. People spend time cleaning, sort of bringing in, like trying to kind of sweep in good luck, and to just sort of really try and mentally focus on looking forward. Right. So that can be a great practice just in our, that's why we have the whole, whatever new year resolutions, right? Is because we're trying to set our intentions for the year. And I'm not a big resolution person, because I just feel like that I'm just too much of a rebel to set give myself a resolution. And then just because I gave it to myself, I immediately want to break it, even if it's bad for me. So to do so. So I feel, but I do really like the idea of setting intentions. And I think that that's probably the one thing that I do regularly at these different kind of intervals. And whether you follow it precisely or, you're listening to this 3 days later, it's not too late. You too can burn an Imbolc candle. You
Right.
too can invoke the healing and loving energy of Bridget. And you can, kind of just mark this time. It really can help mentally to just have some sort of it could be a cleaning, it can be a ritual, it can be both things, it can be a meal, putting together a lovely meal of root vegetables that you've basically hoarded through the winter.
Right.
That the last of your store, trusting that there will be more, not
Mhm.
going overboard, but trusting that there will be more,
Right.
is a big part of it too.
Well, I guess that sort of ties in this whole thing with with Bridget there, with the part of rejuvenation and birth and stuff like that. Is that trust part? Is that if you're following along and you're being thankful for what the spoils of the earth have given you through the past year, that you maintain that faith that will continue on
Yeah.
into the coming year, that you go through this whole rigmarole over and over and over again, right? The wheel of time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That you're marking it, you're acknowledging it, but you also are taking part in it. You're not
Hmm.
just letting it happen.
Yeah, I was sort of thinking about, like, we talked about during Christmas time there about the Yule lads. I was just wondering if there
Oh
was
yeah.
any
I
crazy
I
crazy little
really I'd have to dig into I actually that would be a great area to explore. I don't know much more about some of the because that's Icelandic,
Yeah.
and I'm sure there's many other creatures and events that take place throughout the year. But off the top of my head, I don't know of any like those. Those are like the fantastic. For whatever reason, between basically October and December, all of the good creatures come out to pray and play, So
Yeah, yeah.
there's of course the association with witches, which in later times became a negative and became the association of like dancing with the devil and
Hmm.
being in basically trying to hurt people, which is really quite the opposite of what witches are all about. I
Hmm.
mean, some witches hurt people, but usually only the ones that deserve it, right?
Right.
So
Well, you sort of see that it's always sort of interesting when you see the characters that are in there, right? So you have the women things of birth and goodness and stuff like that. Then you have Samhain. You have the guys that are all bad and cause all the ruckus and that.
yeah,
And you
out
have
there
the
cavorting.
yeah, you have the Yule lads that go and steal your sausages and
Right,
curdle the
but
milk.
keep in
And
mind that the Yule lads are all at the command of their mother, who is a witch.
oh, that's true. Yes, that's right.
She's yeah, she's the head witch.
But another thing that I noticed there too, and actually, if people out there listening there's actually a really great series on YouTube. There, it's this channel called the Fortress of Lau. It's spelled
Hmm.
Lugh, and he goes through a lot of the Celtic mythology, giants, fairies, and
Oh,
all these
cool.
different festivals and stuff like that. And he goes back into where the meanings of the words are, like how they come from, like old German or wherever from and stuff like that. But one thing that I sort of noticed there, if correct me if I'm wrong here, is that a lot of the characters that I'll just say characters, but entities, characters, people there, they all deal with some sort of faction of living, whether it's hammering a nail in something, cooking a sausage, plowing a field,
Stealing a
and
sausage. Yeah,
but
yeah.
their name is associated with the action. A lot
Yeah,
of
like
them.
the origin of that name is yeah. I mean, I think that's certainly the case, or they are representing an aspect of our own humanity, which then like within the Christianization of a lot of that folklore, you have a moral imposed. There might have been a moral of the story already, but a new moral will be imposed, and that'll usually be, being pious and good, and not drinking or wearing red shoes are all like the good things, and then otherwise, being greedy and wild and running around in the forest, being negatives or whatever it is. But yeah, so you will have something. I mean, I guess we can kind of think about that when you get into even just like our modern days of the week, and right, like Thursday being Thor's Day, and being sacred to the god Thor, and therefore it was because he is the the god of thunder, but also had his hammer that he slams down to create thunder and lightning. It's also a day of hard work,
right?
Traditionally. So and I think if you and that's really fun to do. Actually, I love doing that. I know that one of the terms of goblin is used in a variety of different ways, and I've seen that even in some of the older lore, or the way that people refer to, they might call. They might say something's a puka, and they mean like a fairy spirit, but they aren't necessarily talking about what I consider a puka, which would be a shape-shifting like horse / rabbit fairy. But it could also be used in the way we might just use the term ghost or ghoul or goblin. But goblin's kind of an interesting one, because you've got goblins, you've got hobgoblins, you've got coblin. I think the Welsh word is like coblin. And then that kind of evolved into being pronounced goblin in other places. But all of these creatures are kind of similar in that they're somewhat domesticated. They're sort of like helpful fairies that are industrious and work hard, but also can be very mischievous and play tricks, especially toward people who don't work as hard as they should be. And so hard work again is rewarded, and even leprechauns have they're thought of as the cobblers of the fairy kingdom. And so the word origins, that's a really important part of any kind of like looking into folklore and backstories, is that you have, we're thinking in English, right? But you have an English interpretation, probably during like the Victorian era, of somebody whose first language may not have been English. It may have been Irish or Scots Gaelic or Welsh, and so then there's some misinterpretation. Or you see that all the time in North America, right? Like the way we write down the names of first peoples or places, indigenous names, and it's spelled completely differently, or we lump them all in to one tribe because we don't actually understand the subtleties of the different nations. So you see that all the time, right? Where like this kind of, we are still unpacking that, but it's always very interesting to see all the different influences. And also, like I've been doing some additional werewolf research lately.
Ooh.
Yeah. And I have, just because it's a delicious recipe, I want to read you a really fun recipe that is werewolf related.
Good.
Before we wrap up here. But yeah, so the word origin, I would just say keep an open mind when you learn that something's called something, because you don't always know. The chain of command is frequently lost in that translation, right? So yeah. So I don't know if you want to, I wanted to tell you one thing. This is harvest related, but it's just kind of
you're gonna say that thing that was called
Harrow. Okay, so this is just a fun fact, and it doesn't have really anything to do with Imbolc, but it kind of does have to do with harvest, but it has to do with word origins. And it actually, I have to remember the whole sequence. So it has to do with the word hearse, the modern word hearse, which we know to be a slow-moving vehicle that carries a coffin from, the wake or the visitation to the the mortuary to the cemetery.
Right.
So once upon a time, there was a thing called a harrow, or it was referred to as a harrow, which was basically like a many-tined pitchfork, and it was used to turn the soil. At one point, now it was actually called something else. Let's see if I can remember the origins. It was a harrow, and then okay. So it's turned upside down, and it's sort of laid aside, and people go into the church. This is as Christianity is starting to occupy more of Europe, right. And it's sort of flipped over, and it reminds the ecclesiastical ministers of a candelabra, and so it becomes placed on top of. They start referring to this candelabra as this harrow, okay. Which that's what like the locals are calling it, because it looks like it, and it kind of makes sense. They walk into this church they've never seen before. Well, that looks like an upside down pitchfork. We're going to call that a harrow.
Okay.
That harrow is placed on the altar and is lit and full of candles. That is then in turn often placed on when the coffins are placed in the church, when people aren't having wakes so much in their house, or even when they are, that candelabra is then placed on top of the coffin as a means of kind of, making that part of the ritual. Mm-hmm. So now we have this thing called a harrow that's now sitting on top of a coffin. So then that is actually kind of the whole thing eventually starts being called a harrow. Right. Then that becomes you put the coffin on the cart, and you're going very slowly so that you don't blow the candles out. That then starts being referred to as a hearse, which is like kind of a derivation of this word harrow, which has probably been called a har for a while. Now it's right. a hearse, and eventually that becomes known as a hearse, referring to the cart, the coffin, and the candelabra. The candelabra is eventually taken away, but the cart and the coffin stay. Right. That's called a hearse. And then, of course, we have the tradition of driving. So, we think it's out of respect, right, that we drive slowly through the cemetery. But once upon a time, it was because you had to go slow, so the candles didn't go out. The candles are gone now. Now you just have the whole thing, and eventually that entire vehicle carrying the coffin becomes known as a hearse, and that all comes from basically an upside down pitchfork.
Wow, isn't
that so cool?
that is amazing, because there's a bunch of other things. There's why I actually probably going to do a show on this in probably a couple of months. I've been writing about this, about why we do certain things a certain way when it bears no meaning for doing it in the first place.
Right.
Like I always thought the reason for the hearse going slow was because you had people lining the streets to mourn as they went through, pay their respects. But that's not really actually really true, I guess, in a way, because I guess if you were a king or a queen or something like that, or high royalty or high something like that, then you would have like the masses would come out to see you as you were being taken to your 6 foot under slumber. But for any Joe Blow, they were probably thrown in the in the back of
as many in the cart as possible. Or like another one that I really love is the story behind the like superstitions, like like opening an umbrella indoors being bad luck.
Yeah.
And it's because umbrellas, when they first became, like a thing, because there's paper parasols and stuff, but when they started being able to use like metal and it had like a spring action, they were deadly weapons. They were very, very dangerous and very pokey. And so it became courtesy to not open your umbrella indoors, because you could actually physically hurt someone. And so therefore it became looked upon as bad etiquette, which then eventually became bad luck.
Yeah,
But really, they just didn't want you stabbing someone in the eye when you were like, "Oh, I don't want to get my blouse wet."
Yeah, but that's a the form and function, and then all of a sudden, how quickly something can change from one little incident, and then I guess it's almost like that game Telephone, where somebody
Yeah.
says one thing, and then all of a sudden, a couple of years down the line, no, this is what it really is. Like, you're going,
Yeah, yeah, and that, like, there's a few of those kind of more like modern cryptid phenomenon, like was it like the is it like the Thin Man or something like that? That like
yeah,
kind of mysteriously just sort of only came about in the last like 10 or 15 years because
oh, the Tulpa or
internet.
Tulpa or Tulpa. I think
Tulpa
that's
where people are like, yeah,
where they
they
start telling the story, and the story comes to life.
yep,
Yeah, and that
yep.
was I think they did a episode of that on Supernatural, the TV show, where everybody was talking about it on the internet, and this thing
Yeah,
showed up in
yeah, and then it became it's
yeah,
that, hey, the art of manifestation.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Well, that's
unwitting manifestation of monsters.
okay. Well, we got a few minutes left. Tell us about this werewolf
Okay, so
recipe.
yeah, so I have been, and I kind of, I was on Dave Scott's show last night, and we were talking about werewolves, and I have been researching a little bit more about werewolves, and one of the things that's really been kind of blowing my mind lately as the number of people who are, or the documented cases of deliberately wanting to become a werewolf. I think that I had the idea that werewolfism or lycanthropy was something more like a disease that you would catch in the way like a vampire bites you.
Right.
But in fact, there's more and more evidence. I mean, I think we kind of know this in North America, at least, with a lot of the kind of more shamanistic rituals or the more like animal skin donning type rituals, which we see across also pagan Europe. The invocation of crossing into the animal realm allows a sort of element of shape shifting. So, I mean, that's not like as revolutionary, but the idea that people, frequently witches or magical practitioners, were using the full moon and the power of the full moon and lycanthropic streams or plants in order to actually try and make themselves into werewolves.
Wow.
So that's really trippy. So I just want to, you'll really appreciate this because it's the delicious recipe.
Okay.
And this is from Elliot O'Donnell, is an Irish writer. He published this in 1917. And he's one of my two favorite werewolf writers of the back in the day. So this is, he's got this list of all of these things, but this is yet another method of acquiring the property of lycanthropy consists in making first a magic circle on the ground at 12 o'clock on a night when the moon is full. There is no strict rule as to the magnitude of the circle, though one of about 7 feet in diameter would seem to be the size most commonly adopted. Then, in the center of the circle, a wood fire, heating thereon an iron vessel containing 1 pint of clear spring water, and any 7 of the following ingredients: hemlock, aloe, opium, mandrake, solanum, poppy seed, asafoetida, and parsley.
Wow.
Most of those cause pretty extreme hallucinations and death.
And death.
So, there's actually like, I just found all of this stuff because, I'm working on this book that is a little bit more about the plants and how they come into lore. And so I just hit that and I was like, wow, this is just amazing. And it even says, just for the recipe, half an ounce to 1 ounce of hemlock, 30 grains of aloe, 2 to 4.5 drams of opium.
Yeah.
Just opium. Doesn't say laudanum, just opium. If you can get your hands on pure opium. 1 ounce to 1.5 ounces of mandrake, because that half ounce could really make all the difference.
Right.
Solanum, by which I assume they're referring to belladonna or deadly nightshade, probably, but can't be sure.
Right.
Poppy seed.
and a tomato is a nightshade. So hey, you can
Tomatoes
make
and nightshade, so is a potato. So it could
yeah,
be like, there's a lot of
lots of
possibilities,
potatoes over there in Ireland.
right? Poppy seed, um, asafoetida is like kind of a really smelly root that
Okay.
looks a little bit. I think the plant looks a little bit like a garlic. I actually think it might be a garlic relative, and then parsley. You just throw in 2 to 3 ounces of parsley. Why not?
Why not?
Make sure it tastes good.
There you go. Okay. Well, we got to
So
wrap
much
this
fun.
one up there. Quickly tell them where they can go and track you down for all your stuff, your books and everything like that there, Varla.
Yeah, thank you so much. Varlaventura.net. Books are available wherever books are sold, and you can find me on all the places under the name Varla Ventura. All the socials,
All the
except
socials.
TikTok. I haven't quite wrapped my mind around TikTok yet.
Yeah, either
I'm
have I.
just not a video person, so I really am a slow adapter.
We do what we can do, I guess. Eh?
Yeah. I stand in my lane with the written word.
Well, I want to thank you very much for joining me, and we'll do this once again with another different iteration of whatever these holidays and days come across this year. I want
Sounds
to thank
great.
my production crew there for sticking with me, and this has been the delicious recipe, and for February, and we're into Imbolc. We're into the beginning of the end of winter into spring. So thank you all for tuning in, and we'll check you all next week.